The moment someone can reliably make you defend yourself, explain yourself, or prove yourself, they own something inside you. Not because they took it, because you left it available. And you have been leaving it available for a very long time. You did not lose your strength all at once. That is the part nobody talks about. It did not leave in one dramatic moment you could point to and say, there, that is where it went. It left in small amounts, across ordinary days, in ways that looked nothing like losing. It left in the conversation you replayed at 2 a.m, trying to figure out where it went wrong, even though some part of you already knew it was never going to go right. It left in the explanation you gave to someone who had already made up their mind before you opened your mouth, and you knew that, and you explained anyway. It left in the argument you entered not because you believed winning it would change anything, but because the silence felt like surrender, and you could not tolerate what that silence said about you. That is where it went. Not to distraction, not to laziness, to people and moments that consumed it without ever returning anything. Think about the last time someone said something that should not have mattered, and it stayed with you for days. You carried it into rooms it had no business entering. You carried it to the gym, to dinner, to the middle of a conversation with someone who had nothing to do with it. You were physically present in those places and emotionally somewhere else entirely, still standing in the moment where someone got inside you and rearranged something. That is not sensitivity. That is access. And access is a form of power. The moment someone learns that a certain kind of comment will make you defend yourself, they have found a lever. They do not even have to pull it hard. They just have to reach for it and you move. The moment someone discovers that your need to be understood is stronger than your ability to walk away from a conversation that is going nowhere, they have something. Not something you gave them consciously, something you gave them by being readable. You have been readable for a long time, not because you are weak, you are not weak, but somewhere along the way you absorbed the idea that reacting meant you cared, that silence meant indifference, that explaining yourself was a form of respect. So you reacted. You explained. You stayed in conversations long after they stopped being conversations and became something else. Performances, negotiations, quiet tests of how much of yourself you would hand over before you finally stopped. And the cost was not the time. Time you can account for. The cost was something harder to name. It was the version of you that existed before you entered those rooms. Focused, settled, moving towards something. And the version that came out the other side, a little more tired, a little less certain, carrying something heavy that was never yours to carry in the first place. You have been doing this so long, it feels normal. The fatigue feels normal. The low-grade tension of never quite being at peace feels normal. You have adjusted to living at a level of emotional expenditure that would have seemed unsustainable to you years ago, and you adjusted so gradually that you stopped noticing it was an adjustment at all. This is not about blaming anyone. The people who found those levers were simply using what you left available. The harder question, the one worth sitting with, is why you kept leaving it available. Why, even when you saw what was happening, something in you could not stop. That question does not have a comfortable answer, but it is the only question worth asking. When you stop responding to someone, something happens inside them that they cannot control. Most people never learn this because they are too busy being the one who keeps responding. They are too busy crafting the next message, softening the next tone, reaching back across the distance trying to close it. But if you have ever gone quiet, truly quiet, not out of sulking, but out of a decision, you may have noticed what happens on the other side. They do not simply move on, they accelerate. The human brain is not built to tolerate being dismissed. It is wired at a level far older than reason to monitor social connection the way it monitors physical safety. When that connection is suddenly withdrawn, the brain does not file it away calmly. It treats it as unresolved. It begins searching. It replays the last conversation looking for the moment things shifted. It drafts explanations in the background, rehearses things to say, checks for responses that are not there. People who sleep fine most nights find themselves awake at 2 a.m, going over something you said 3 weeks ago, or something you stopped saying, trying to locate the exact place they lost you. You were not the one who left. You simply stopped arriving. That distinction matters more than it seems. Because what you are witnessing in that person is not the effect of something you did to them. It is the effect of something you stopped doing for them. And what you were doing, what most generous, attentive, emotionally available people spend years doing without realizing it, was providing something the other person had quietly built their stability around. Your reactions, your responses, your predictable presence at the end of every reach. When that disappears, the absence has weight. This is not manipulation. It is not a tactic you deploy with cold calculation. It is simply what happens when you stop making yourself emotionally available to everyone who asks for it. The people who have grown accustomed to your attention, who have learned that you will engage with every provocation, explain yourself through every misunderstanding, remain present through every dynamic that should have cost someone something. Those people feel your withdrawal in a way they cannot quite name or rationalize. They only know that something they relied on is no longer there. And here is the part that most people spend their entire lives missing. The fact that they relied on it means you were never powerless. You were the one generating the thing being consumed. You just did not know that was what was happening. So you kept generating it, and they kept consuming it. And somewhere in that dynamic, the weight of the relationship settled entirely onto you, without either of you consciously choosing it. Silence, real silence, the kind that comes from decision rather than avoidance, does not communicate nothing. It communicates that you are no longer available at every hour for every purpose to every person. And that information lands. It lands in the chest. It lands as a question the other person has to sit with. And the sitting is not comfortable. And the discomfort is not something you caused. It is something that was always there, underneath the noise of your constant availability. You were never empty. You were never powerless. You were simply spending something without knowing it had a value. And the moment you understand that your presence, your attention, your response is something that costs you to give, the entire arrangement changes. You stop giving it away automatically, and you find out very quickly how much it was worth. There is a difference between someone who is absent and someone who is withdrawn. Most people cannot tell them apart from the outside, but the person living it knows exactly which one they are. Absence is what happens when you have nothing to give, and you disappear because staying requires more than you have. Withdrawal is something else entirely. It is a decision made from fullness, not depletion. It is the choice to be in a room without being available to everything the room demands of you. One is collapse. The other is construction. What you are learning to build is not a wall. Walls are defensive. What you are building is more like a threshold, a point past which not everything is permitted to enter. And the building of it does not happen in one dramatic moment where you suddenly become unreachable. It happens in small, deliberate choices that most people around you will not even notice at first. It happens when your phone rings and you look at it and decide, not out of avoidance but out of genuine selection, that this is not the moment for that conversation. Not because you are hiding, because you are somewhere else in your mind doing something that matters, and the call can wait. That pause, that simple act of not reaching for it immediately, is where the practice begins. Not the grand gesture, the small one. It happens when someone sends a message that is clearly designed to pull a reaction from you, and instead of firing back within minutes, you set it down. Not forever. You simply do not make their urgency into yours. You finish what you were doing, you eat your meal, you close your eyes for a minute, and then, if a response is even necessary, you give one on your terms rather than theirs. Most people have been operating on other people's timelines their entire lives without naming it that. Someone reaches and they reach back immediately, not because the moment is right, but because the delay feels like a statement, and they are afraid of what that statement might cost them. But what they do not realize is that the constant, immediate availability is already making a statement. It is saying that whatever they were doing before you contacted them was less important than responding to you right now. And when you say that to everyone, it becomes true for no one. You become the person who is always there, which sounds like loyalty and functions like furniture. The people who are most sought out are rarely the most available. Think about anyone whose attention has ever meant something to you. There was probably a quality of selectiveness about them, something that made you aware, even slightly, that their presence in a conversation was not guaranteed. That quality was not accident or arrogance. It was the natural result of someone who had decided, consciously or not, that their attention had a direction, that it was going somewhere specific, that not every moment of contact automatically redirected it. You can build that, not by performing mystery, not by manufacturing distance, but by genuinely having somewhere your attention belongs. A goal that is not finished, a standard of living you are building toward quietly, work that happens when no one is watching. When your presence is occupied by something real, the selectiveness is not strategy. It is just accurate. People sense the difference between someone who is busy and someone who is building. One makes them feel inconvenient. The other makes them want to deserve your time. You already know who they are. You have known for a while. Some part of you identified them a long time ago and then quietly talked yourself out of what you saw because naming it felt unkind, or dramatic, or like a problem you would have to do something about. So instead, you kept showing up. You kept engaging. You kept giving the benefit of a doubt you had already spent. There is a certain kind of person who will sit across from you, smile at the right moments, say nothing overtly wrong, and still leave you feeling subtly smaller after every interaction. They do not insult you directly. They work in suggestions, a comment about something you are working on that is technically a question, but lands like a verdict, an observation about your choices delivered with just enough concern to make disagreement feel defensive. They are civil in a way that makes the damage hard to prove, even to yourself. But you feel it. You have always felt it. The way their support never quite arrives without something attached. The way their interest in your life seems most alive when something in your life is going poorly. What they are receiving from your reaction is confirmation. Every time you explain yourself to them, every time you soften your ambition slightly in their company, Every time you leave the conversation having second-guessed something you were certain about an hour before, they have gotten what they came for. Not because they are calculating, because this is simply the only way they know how to feel stable, by finding the edge of someone else's confidence and pressing on it. Then there are the ones who watch from a distance and deliver verdicts. They have opinions about your path, your decisions, your pace, your choices. Confident opinions, frequently expressed, almost always unsolicited. What they do not have is anything they are currently building. The criticism is not wisdom, it is weight redistribution. At some point, they made a quiet peace with not moving forward, and that peace is only sustainable if the people around them are not moving forward either. Your ambition is a mirror they did not ask to stand in front of. Your reaction to their criticism, the way you slow down, reconsider, explain yourself, is the only thing that makes the arrangement work. The moment you stop engaging, the criticism loses its audience and therefore its purpose. The third kind is harder to see clearly because they arrive as people who need you. They are in crisis, repeatedly. Different crises, same structure, chaos, urgency, your involvement required, temporary resolution, reset. You help because helping feels like the right thing to do. And for a long time it is, but at some point, if you are honest, you notice that your help never actually changes anything in their life. The situation evolves, but the dependency remains. What is being consumed is not your advice or your time alone. It is your emotional availability, your willingness to be present to their disorder at the cost of your own order. Every conversation that pulls you into their chaos is a conversation that does not happen in the quiet where you think clearly, rest properly, and move your own life forward. The thing these three have in common is that none of them require your reaction to survive. They only require it to remain comfortable. Your discomfort is invisible to them. Your growth is inconvenient for them. Your withdrawal will confuse them briefly, and then the weight of that confusion will settle exactly where it belongs, on them. Not on you. Knowing this and living it are two completely different things. You can understand everything in the previous chapters. You can agree with all of it. Recognize yourself in all of it. Feel the truth of it settling somewhere in your chest. And then someone says exactly the right thing in exactly the right tone, and your body is already responding before your mind has finished reading the situation. The jaw tightens. The breathing changes. Something moves across your face that you did not choose to put there. And in that half second, everything you understood becomes irrelevant, because understanding was never the problem. The body keeps its own account. It has been reacting to certain tones, certain dismissals, certain specific kinds of disrespect for years. Long enough that the reaction is not a decision anymore, it is a reflex. And you cannot think your way out of a reflex. You can only train your way out of it. This is where most people abandon the philosophy. They read something, they feel the logic of it, they decide they will be different the next time. And then the next time arrives and they discover that deciding is not the same as training. The decision lives in the mind, training lives in the body, and what you are trying to change is not your opinion about how to respond. It is the automatic physical sequence that happens before your opinion has any say in the matter. What the training actually looks like is smaller than you expect. It begins not in the hardest moments, but in the ordinary ones. Someone makes a comment that catches you. Instead of letting your face respond immediately, you hold it. Not forever, for one breath. You let the feeling rise, and it will rise. That is not the problem. Feeling it is not failure. And you simply do not perform it. You do not swallow it or pretend it is not there. You feel it fully, and you decline to put it on your face for the room to read. That one breath is the entire practice. At first, it costs you something. The effort of holding the expression still while the feeling moves through you is real effort, and you will feel it as effort. But the second time is slightly easier. And the 10th time something shifts, not because the feeling is gone, but because you have introduced a gap between what you feel and what you show. And that gap is where your autonomy lives. The point is not to become someone who feels nothing. That is not discipline. That is damage. The point is to stop making your interior weather visible to people who have no right to read it and no intention of handling it carefully if they do. Your anger, your hurt, your frustration, these are accurate responses to real things. They do not need to be hidden from yourself. They need to stop being handed to the people who caused them as a kind of receipt, confirming that the delivery was successful. Every time you close that gap, even slightly, even imperfectly, you make a small deposit into something that accumulates. The person who could not sit still through a provocation 6 months ago and the person who can hold themselves completely steady through the same provocation now are not different people by nature. They are the same person, but one of them practiced. The question that follows this, though, is the harder one. Why does the reaction happen so fast in the first place? Why does certain disrespect reach you so deeply that the body responds before the mind can arrive? That answer goes further back than you might expect. The need for approval did not arrive in your adulthood. It was already there, fully formed by the time you were old enough to notice it. Before you had language for what you were doing, you were already scanning faces, reading the room. adjusting your behavior based on what the expression across from you seemed to require. You learned early that certain versions of you were received warmly, and certain versions created distance. And you began, without anyone telling you to, without even realizing you were making a choice, editing yourself toward the version that kept people close. That editing never stopped. It just became invisible because it became automatic. You do not notice it now the way you would notice a decision. You notice it as a vague unease when you have said something honest in a room that went quiet. You notice it as the urge to follow up a firm answer with an explanation that softens it. You notice it in the way you check your phone after sending a message that said something real, half waiting for a signal that it landed correctly, that you are still okay in the eyes of the person on the other end. The behavior is not dramatic, it is constant. And because it is constant, it has started to feel like personality rather than pattern. Here is what it has cost you that you have not fully accounted for yet. Every time you adjusted what you said to protect someone else's comfort, you moved slightly further from your own. Every time you chose the softer version of an honest thing because the full version felt like too much risk, you practiced at a very low level, not trusting yourself. Over years, that practice compounds. And what it produces is a person who is genuinely uncertain about their own instincts, not because their instincts are poor, but because they have spent so long overriding them in real time that the signal has become harder to read. The approval you have been seeking was never neutral currency. It was always priced, and the price was paid in the small surrenders you made so consistently that you stopped experiencing them as surrenders at all. What makes this difficult to address is that the people whose approval you have been managing are often people you love, or people with authority over something real in your life. The family member whose disappointment sits heavy. The group you belong to that has an unspoken contract about how its members behave. The colleague whose opinion affects something you care about. Withdrawing your need for their approval does not mean leaving them or dismissing what they think. It means that their response to you stops being the information you use to decide whether you were right. That shift is small in description and enormous in practice. Because for most people, the approval of certain figures has been functioning as a substitute for their own judgment for so long that removing it does not feel like freedom at first. It feels like losing something to navigate by. But what you are actually losing is the noise. Underneath it, quieter and more consistent than you expected, is a sense of what you actually think, what you actually want. What you were going to say before you edited it. That version of you did not disappear. It just learned to wait. It has been waiting a long time, and it is more intact than you realize. Something has already shifted in you, even if you cannot name it precisely yet. It is not a feeling of arrival. It is quieter than that. It is more like a settling. The way a room feels different after you have moved the furniture back to where it always should have been. Nothing dramatic has changed from the outside, but you are standing in it differently. The person you are becoming is not louder or more dominant or more difficult to be around. They are simply harder to move, not rigid. Rigidity is just another form of reaction braced against a force it cannot stop noticing. This is something else. This is the quality of someone who has found the ground under their feet and stopped mistaking other people's turbulence for their own. You will walk into a room where someone is clearly waiting to see how you respond to them, and you will notice it, and it will not require anything from you. Not a performance of calm, not a suppression of irritation, not a strategy. Just the simple absence of a need to respond to what they are broadcasting. That absence will communicate something without you choosing to communicate it. People read it in ways they cannot explain. They become slightly more careful, slightly more deliberate. Not because you have made yourself intimidating, but because they sense, correctly, that you are not available to be managed. Relationships reorganize around this quality over time. Some of them quietly end, not with conflict but with distance, because the dynamic that sustained them required a version of you that is no longer reliably present. You will feel the loss of some of those, even the ones that were costing you. That is honest, and it is allowed. But beneath the loss there is something that does not leave, a kind of spaciousness in your own mind that was not there before, in the hours and days you used to spend maintaining connections that were pulling more than they were giving. Others will stay, and the ones that stay will change texture. There is a conversation that becomes possible between two people when neither of them is performing for the other, when the approval seeking has been removed from both sides, and what remains is just two people talking without an agenda underneath it. You may not have had many conversations like that. You will recognize the difference immediately when you do. What you are carrying forward from here is not a set of rules. Rules require maintenance. They have to be remembered and applied, and they wear out under pressure. What you are carrying is a reorientation, a different relationship to your own reactions, your own attention, your own presence. When something is trying to pull you off center, you will feel the pull. That has not changed and will not change. But the pull and your response to the pull are no longer the same event. There is a gap now, small at first, wider with practice. And in that gap, for the first time in a long time, there is a choice. Not the performance of choice, not the exhausting effort of talking yourself out of a reaction already halfway out the door. An actual choice made from somewhere quiet. That is not the end of something. That is what it feels like when something finally begins. At the beginning of this, you were asked to look at where your strength had actually been going. The arguments, the explanations, the late nights replaying conversations with people who had already made up their minds. That inventory was uncomfortable because it was accurate. But here is what that inventory was also telling you, underneath everything. That you had strength worth taking, that people found it worth the effort to reach for, that something in you was valuable enough to drain. You were never the problem. You were simply unguarded. And now you understand the difference between someone who has nothing worth protecting and someone who simply has not learned to protect it yet. You are the second one. You always were. The only thing that changes from here is that you know it.